we have always been a reflection of the nation that we serve. And the nation may not have been aware to the level that we were, and there are all kinds of Clausewitzian explanations for this about the eternal Trinity and all those other things we won't bore the listeners with, but read your Clausewitz.
Exactly.
The military was more consciously aware and focused on negotiating those changes and negotiating that rebuilding. But we were just a reflection and an extension of the society in which we served.
And we were structurally committed to the rebuilding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And whenever we restructured or expanded the base or reduced the base of who served and how and why, that was an extension of what was going on in the country.
Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
Welcome to the February experience of the Civic Brief. I'm Dr. Ike Wilson. Now, this month, we're going to step directly into the terrain beneath politics, those domestic places, the places where trust, meaning, and identity once converged into something we used to call America's civic religion. Today, we have two perfect guests to explore this with, but first, let me set the stage, and I'm going to set the stage, frankly, candidly, a little soberly. We Americans have lost our religion, as I see it anyway, our civic religion, that is. Of the five enduring credos that once defined American identity, those being liberty, egalitarianism, individualism, populism, and laissez-faire, we now find ourselves divided on all five. In the past, Americans have always argued passionately over the how-tos, right? How to achieve the American dream. But today, we're also disagreeing over what that dream is, why it matters, and perhaps more chillingly, we're arguing over for whom that American dream is to exist. Now, our divisions reach beyond politics into the very ideas that ground our democratic republic. We are split not only on beliefs, but on national interests themselves. We're fragmented on and along at least four widening fault lines. And again, this month's theme is about domestic fault lines and how we could have lost our civic religion. Those four fault lines, each reinforcing each other. Now, let me run through the fault lines, at least as I see it. The first fracture lies in economic imbalance. Once, prosperity rose with the fortunes of the middle class. And I don't want to be Pollyannish about this or a cockeyed optimist in retrograde or retrospective, but broadly speaking, relatively speaking, once upon a time, not that long ago, prosperity did rise more often than not and in more ways than not with the fortunes of what we still call the middle class in America. Today, prosperity is largely captured by those with advanced education or capital, right? Leaving the rest relatively behind. The second of these divides us by culture and race. Expanding rights. We live in several decades, let's say 3 or 4, probably upwards of 6 decades, where we've actually witnessed an expansion of rights, recognition, and diversity. They've all broadened during that time period. They've broadened America's story for all of us. Yet, they've also sparked anxieties among those who fear losing the cultural world they once knew and were comfortable in. These fears of cultural displacement now threaten and redefine our politics. Folks, this is a cyclical thing in American politics. 3 steps, small p progressive forward, and then there's typically always some type of retrograde or a what scholars call a restorative walk backwards, right? We are in one of those moments. A third fault line, largely related, and all these are interrelated, but largely related to the first that I've already described, is what I'll call class rebellion. A growing revolt of the working class against perceived elite dominance across all spectrums. And fourth, cutting across all of these, is the divisive communications. A media landscape fragmented into echo chambers that allow every citizen to choose not only their own opinions, but more worrisomely, at least it should be worrisomely to all Americans, to choose their own facts. Truth itself has become partisan. It's become tribal warfare. How the heck did we arrive here? Simply put, at least as I'm going to put it today, and we're going to fence about this today and going forward the whole month, I believe our institutions have failed us. And more importantly, we, the people, we have failed them. We've neglected our civic duty to hold power accountable and to safeguard the constitutional balance designed for our republic. Let me run through the institutions each individually. Our legislatures, our Congress at the highest end of our government, our federalist system, surrendered much of its policymaking power to the increasingly imperial executive. Our judiciary, at the top end, our Supreme Court, battered by ideological assaults, to some degree from both extremes, risks serving state interest over the national good. Meanwhile, the press, we see the press teetering between partisanship and propaganda, and our military, of which all three of us are soldiers for life, our military, long trusted above politics, risks being drawn into the currents of a liberal power, what I'll call a Praetorian relationship. In ceding civic command of our institutions, Americans creep more and more every day towards becoming a market state rather than a nation state, or more pointedly, an illiberal democracy, an illiberal democratic wolf, perhaps clothed in liberal sheep's forms and clothing. Now, to reverse this trajectory, and I believe we can and must, we must reclaim those institutions that we've allowed to atrophy. Renewal, any type of renewal, begins with civic re-engagement, with rediscovering not just what America stands for, but what binds us together still. This is our call to action and must, in some form or another, become our collective plan of action. Now, today we're joined by leaders who have lived at the front lines of civic formation, military officers, educators, institutional stewards, who have watched our civic fabric fray from the inside. Let me introduce both of them briefly. First, Colonel retired J.M. Parker, Ph.D., former professor and chair of international security at the College of International Security Affairs, National Defense University in Washington, D.C. A 26-year veteran of the United States Army, Dr. Parker spent over a decade at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he served as professor and director of international relations and national security studies within the famed and to a certain degree fabled Department of Social Sciences, shaping one of the Academy's premier academic programs. Now, Jay has also held distinguished appointments at Georgetown University, Columbia University, and across the National Defense University system, bringing more than 3 decades of teaching, leadership, and policy experience to the study of global security. A Columbia University PhD, Naval War College graduate, and visiting research fellow at Princeton, Dr. Parker has served in both infantry and psychological operations units and contributed to U.S. humanitarian and peacekeeping missions, including Operation Restore Hope. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a Japan Society U.S.-Japan Leadership Fellow, and a Truman National Security Project Fellow. Jay is recognized nationally and globally, frankly, for his lifelong commitment to advancing the practice and understanding of international security leadership. Colonel Frederick H. Black is a retired U.S. Army officer, educator, and executive leadership consultant whose distinguished career spans more than 5 decades of service to nation and community. A Howard University graduate with a degree in government and an MPA from Syracuse University, Colonel Black served 26 years in the Army, including 15 as a professor of social sciences at the United States Military Academy at West Point within that same sacred, fabled, and famed Department of Social Sciences. Now, after retiring from military service, he founded and led FHB Consulting Incorporated, advising Fortune 500 companies and government leaders, and later served as senior vice president at Black Star Strategies. Fred's a recipient of numerous honors, including the Legion of Merit Bronze Star and multiple civic awards. Colonel Black has also served on the United States Military Academy Board of Visitors and numerous nonprofit boards. A lifelong mentor and civic leader, he brings to every conversation a profound commitment to service, equity, and civic responsibility. Now, this conversation is especially distinctive because all three of us come from the same rare lineage. Former soldier scholars who served as academy professors and directors of program for American politics, international relations, public policy, and strategy within West Point's, again, storied Department of Social Sciences. We taught, mentored, and led at every institution charged with forming the civic, ethical, and strategic judgment of future military leaders. That shared vantage point allows us to ask hard but necessary questions about the state of American politics and polity writ large, but specifically, we're going to spend some time on this specifically, talking about the state of affairs within American academia under the first and second Trump administrations more pointedly, and more profoundly about the current fidelity, trustworthiness, that is, rigor and civic seriousness of joint professional military education. Not as critics from the outside, but as institutional stewards who understand what is at stake when civic formation, academic freedom, and professional military education come under sustained strain. Together, folks, we're going to ask, what did we lose? Why did we lose it? And what might it take to rebuild a civic identity strong enough to re-anchor a republic in a time of compound threats? So with that, I would like to begin. And gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us today. I'm going to open with an opening broad framing question. And within that, I'm going to give you the microphone. I've already held on to it too long. I'm going to give you both the microphone, grapple with the large framing question. Use that time to put your own frame out there, fence with the foil that I've put on the stage for us, the stage set that I've established, fence with that, challenge that if you will, and if you choose to. And then also take advantage of the opportunity to add anything or correct anything that I probably got terribly wrong with your very robust bios. Here's the opening framing question. Each of you have served at the intersection of civic education, national service, and public institutions. When you look at the American civic landscape today, what feels qualitatively different from the world you were commissioned into decades ago? Right? Sorry about the decades ago. We're all wise and young still, but again, decades ago. I'm going to leave it to you. Whichever one of you want to jump on that hand grenade first, please go for it. And thanks again. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let me open by saying thank you first, Ike. When I came into the military almost 60 years ago, we were an army at war. And what was different is if I were to ask my dad about being in an army at war, he could share experiences from something called World War II.
Yeah.
And say, I was in a declared war, and something called Korea, which I think we called a police action.
Yep.
And then his son's in a place called Vietnam, and I don't know what we called it, but euphemistically we said, hey, we're at war. So I was in the army at war. And what looked so differently to me was reading about the police action in World War II and how the American people embraced those who were serving versus this thing called Vietnam. The nation was not exactly in support or aligned with the goals and objectives because most people had no clue what they were. So that's what looked different. To me, entering an institution coming right out of college where in the mid-60s, protest of the day could be on any topic you wanted to choose. It just didn't matter. There was always something being protested. So to leave that environment and go into an army at war, the world seemed very different to me.
Excellent. Excellent. Jay?
First of all, again, thanks for bringing us together, Ike. And it's a particular pleasure to be with this group, since one of the things I've found to be an anchor of whatever success I've had for the last 40 years has been waiting to hear what Fred Black has to say, and then deciding how to proceed from there. I think the difference between Fred and I is an indicator of just how quickly and dramatically circumstances can change. I am certainly old enough to remember Vietnam. I lived in Southeast Asia while my father served there at the height of the war. Remember well having a couple of extra days out of school because all of our teachers were caught in Saigon during what was supposed to be a ceasefire for the Tet holiday, and turned out to be the Tet Offensive. So a lot of the things that Fred mentions are things that are certainly vivid in my memory. And at about the time Fred was in Vietnam, I was on campus listening to rock and roll music and talking bad about my country, as the saying goes. But my commissioning was almost 10 years after Fred's, in a very different army, serving a very different country. Vietnam was half a decade behind us, and there was a real determination on the part of, certainly on the part of the military, but I think on the part of the nation as a whole, to put that experience behind us. And in so doing, as we often do, humanity writ large, not just the United States, forgetting and quickly burying a lot of important, very still salient lessons from that experience. We were in the midst of the Iran hostage crisis. And we had just gone through Watergate, which was also a vivid memory for me. I served on the Hill. My first real job out of college was not the Army, but it was some years before that, working as a staffer in Congress during the year leading up to Nixon's resignation. So one of the things that came out of my experience was, of course, an awareness of just how quickly the civic mood and civic attitudes could shift. And then I went on to serve in Germany for 4.5 years during the Cold War. What, as it turned out to be, was some of the final years of the Cold War, but at the time we thought this was something that was going to stretch on far, far longer. In fact, any conversation that involved, gee, how will the Cold War end, quickly just kind of trickled out, because short of full-fledged nuclear exchange and a winner-take-all hot war, no one could really envision how this would come to a close. But to go back to your earlier points, Ike, one of the things that I think still resonated, whether you're talking about the day Fred was commissioned or the day I was commissioned, interestingly enough, by one of the Cold War's most noteworthy and some would say divisive figures, Barry Goldwater.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I think what was still the same was an attachment to and underpinning of that civic religion that you speak of. The argument was not whether or not we should embrace that and maintain it, and as officers in the Army, defend it. The debate was over how, not
Right.
what.
Right.
Fred, I know you used to, because your former students who would later become my faculty would quote you over and over. And one of the things they said they learned from Fred Black was always to ask, compared to what, according to whom? And that's what I think kind of underlined what was going on with the civic culture for both of certainly our early commissioned years. I would say that really didn't waver, despite all kinds of bumps and grinds and twists and upsets to it. during our time, both separately and together, teaching at the U.S. Military Academy, and didn't start to unravel, in my observation, until, ironically, the point at which traditionally you would think it would come together and tighten and be more cohesive. And that was 9/11, which
Right.
happened while I was at West Point and was part of my experience. A
Yeah.
lot of that unraveling came out of kind of the, not 9/11 itself, but out of the post 9/11 reaction. And where we are now, I think in higher education in particular and civic education in particular, but across the board, is a point where, as you noted, Ike, a lot of these variables are being seriously challenged, if not strongly batted away, and we are looking at those four fault lines, and I think there may even be a few more that that put us in a very different circumstance than what any of us, the three of us, experienced as junior officers, and then later as serving leaders in the Army.
Good point you're making, Jay. And if someone were to ask me, what word could I use over a 26-year career to describe the United States Army? And I suspect both of you would agree, because it didn't matter when you jumped on the train. The word was rebuilding.
Yeah.
We were always rebuilding, but yet the nation didn't seem to express what was going on around them as rebuilding. We had revolutions. We had all sorts of mini and major revolutions occurring in this country, but we never talked about we were rebuilding the nation as we talked about rebuilding the Army. And I remember that great quote from General Colin Powell when he reflected on coming back from Vietnam and looking at the hollow army that we had. And then we served in 1973 Korea, which his book describes in great detail as a broken army. And what we had to do to rebuild that army was to make fundamental change in the way we did our business. Well, if you compared that to the nation that was experiencing all sorts of unrest, was there that commitment to rebuilding and making fundamental change? It wasn't easy. But I think what we experienced in the military was a more controlled mechanism to bring about rebuilding. And we saw that at West Point. When I got to West Point in 76, the President of the United States was the first ever unelected president. Okay. Yeah. So you teach all these things about how you get to be president, and then you put the asterisk on it, right? But then there's this way of becoming the president.
Right.
But that wasn't a problem in terms of what we were doing. What became the problem was the next president. And the Corps cadets being who they were at the time, and from where they came at the time, and their upbringing, their family or whatever, had a really difficult time with this change. And therefore, it shaped the institution, it shaped the Army itself, and here we are rebuilding. And you talk to those cadets from 76 to 80. We were living in the shadow of a cheating scandal that seemed to go on in terms of rebuilding the institution.
Yeah.
And we had the integration of women, the summer of 76, which fundamentally changed the institution and the Army, rebuilding once again. We're asking questions about how does this work? And yet the nation was struggling with what this also meant for those things that you were referring to, Ike. The fact that women demanded to be treated equally in the workplace.
Yeah.
Something that we didn't see expressed in years before, but now was being expressed with all sorts of protests. And you remember the always live ERA amendment process. It never would quit. It never ever came to fruition, but it was a focus point. So we're dealing with all of those kinds of things while we're rebuilding, and we're teaching the young people who are going to go out and lead the nation's military in years to come, and many of them did. You know, they served 35, 40 years after that experience. But, you know, when you go in to a military that's constantly rebuilding, you're always asking that question, what are we trying to achieve? And that was part of what we were struggling with at the academy at the same time. And the leadership was clearly focused on trying to make sure we understood how to answer that question.
One of the things that just really struck me about what you were just saying too, Fred, all three of us had fathers who served in the Second World War, the post-war Korean War Army.
That's right.
And as I look back at my dad's career, and he was always very open about what was, you know, going on at work, and became even more so later when my brother and my wife and I all served, and kind of comparing our experiences, is that at least in our lifetimes and in the service of our fathers and those who were the leaders and who mentored them, the Army has always been rebuilding. In the 1950s, it was, what do we do now that everything seems to be on the shoulders of the Air Force and nuclear weapons? You know, one of my favorite examples is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force in the 1950s, who, in a public speech on record, said, all we need now is a Navy big enough to man the presidential yacht, an Army to guard the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and the Air Force will take care of everything else.
Right.
So,
and he was serious.
And he was serious.
Oh, yeah.
And so the Army was rebuilding, but frankly, you know, the Air Force was new. They were kind of defining themselves. The Navy was trying to still get over sort of the battleship hangover and what was this new kind of Navy that was at odds with everything certainly Mahan and Corbett used to talk about, but on the other hand, maybe not. So the military in that sense, and by natural extension, the professional military education that serves that military is always in this process of rebuilding. I would argue that's because we always have been, you know, going back to pre-1775, we have always been a reflection of the nation that we serve. And the nation may not have been aware to the level that we were, and there are all kinds of Clausewitzian explanations for this about the eternal Trinity and all those other things we won't bore the listeners with, but read your Clausewitz.
Exactly.
The military was more consciously aware and focused on negotiating those changes and negotiating that rebuilding. But we were just a reflection and an extension of the society in which we
And we were
served.
structurally committed to the rebuilding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And whenever we restructured or expanded the base or reduced the base of who served and how and why, that was an extension of what was going on in the country. The very reason that we have the civil military structure that we have with the divided powers where if you want to find out who runs the Army and you're doing a PowerPoint briefing, you got to have two slides. You got to have one for Article 1 and one for Article 2. that says what Congress does and what the executive is responsible for.
Yes. Thank
That was
you.
just an extension of our pre-colonial experience.
Mm-hmm.
The British Civil War, which was exported to America, which was so brutal that, in fact, as a percentage of the overall population, the casualty figures, the blood cost of that Civil War was literally double what the American Civil War was. And so we built that kind of divided structure. Well, that divided structure certainly led to lots of conflicts, but one of the things I would think we could conclude is that it led to the military, and I include all services in this. It led to the military constantly being tied to, for good or ill, comfortably or uncomfortably, to the changing dynamics in American society. And on the one hand, I go to sleep at night grinding my teeth, and I wake up in the morning and reach my phone wondering what breaking news I'm going to read and despairing about the state of the nation. But as I look back over my 50 plus years of professional life, we have had to experience this before. There are unique dimensions to what we're experiencing now. And I am just enough of a grumpy Eeyore pessimist to say we are deeper in it and closer to the edge of the cliff than we've been in my personal lifetime. But the dynamics of having to understand and assess and being inexorably tied to the changing dynamics of the nation. And let's be clear, because I think a lot of Americans forget about this, the changing dynamics in the world, the challenges to democracies, to constitutional states, to the rule of law, to order in an international society, are absolutely global right now. We are not off by ourselves wrestling with this,
Right.
and that's in my conclusion, that's by design. We were built that way. It was the experience of all three of us in three different generations of the officer corps. It was the experience of our fathers, and it was the experience probably of our grandfathers. So the fact that we're having this conversation and talking about the military and military education being tied to this larger dynamic, we can't lose sight of the fact that this is not something that is done in isolation.
Yeah, and of course, we always remember that the American soldier comes from America. The difference in that rebuilding in the 70s was we created a new system, VOLAR. And we had a volunteer army exclusively. Mm-hmm. Now, some of my better soldiers in Vietnam, I confess, were what we called the voluntoads. Mm-hmm. And my voluntoads were usually kids from the inner city who had done something really bad, like steal a car, rob a drugstore, or whatever. And the judge told them that instead of going to jail, you could join the army. And there they went, and they were on my roster as voluntoads, basically.
Yeah.
And we had those who enlisted for whatever reason and those who were drafted. Then we said no more draft. Now, the army that our dads saw in World War II was the army of reaction. Remember, so many of the people serving reacted to the fact that there was a war and they were going to go help their nation. And then, of course, the numbers started to decline and we ramped up the draft. And we did the same thing. We had a lot of voluntoads. But the point I'm trying to make is that was a reflection of our nation.
Yeah.
And as Ike said, one of those things that was so important is you could not distinguish between those young men and later young men and women from the culture, the background, the households from which they came, and how they were raised.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
You both mentioned structure.
Yeah.
That this rebuilding is a structural thing. I'd love both of you to speak to that more for our listeners, for our watchers, our travelers, I call them. We call ourselves, from a sociological representation, deliberately, that particularly with our service academies, we talk our services themselves, but our service academies as feeders of the officer corps, at least 10% of the officer corps into those armed services. A deliberate, a constitutional, small c and large c constitutional design to ensure structurally that those organizations, those institutions are sociologically representative of the society at that moment.
And how many times did we spend
so important
our precious moments with those cadets, reminding them that they were going to be the officers leading American sons and daughters who did not always have the same advantages they had, did not have the same education, obviously, had not been trained to lead formations, but that's what we're training you for, and you've got to understand who your soldiers are.
Right.
That's
and
right.
we made a point of saying, you need to know the army that you're going to lead. And I'll never forget a young cadet coming back from, what did we call it, CTLT, where they went to a unit for the summer.
Yes.
And this young cadet, and I'm not going to call him because you'll know him when I tell you the name, but this young cadet came back from a summer at Fort Hood. Now, you ought to get hazardous duty pay to spend any time in Texas in July, okay?
Absolutely.
That's where I did CTLT. Yeah.
Well, that's a hardship tour in my book. You ought to get paid.
It was.
See, I did mine in the Mojave Desert with the Op Corps, so I'm a real glutton for
I
punishment.
did mine on Capitol Hill that summer because we didn't have to go to a unit.
You're the smart one, Fred. That's why me and Jay
But
always
anyway,
wait to listen to what
this
you have
young
to say.
cadet came back, and he said, "Sir, you mentioned a couple times about we need to understand those that we're going to lead." I said, "Yeah, we talk about that and why that's important. An officer has to grasp that." He says, "Sir, I can't believe the platoon that I had. I had people who had high school diplomas but could not read or write. I had people that could not speak English. I had people who were pretty good at turning a wrench, but you could not tell them how to do it. You had to show them how to do it."
Right.
So, I can't believe that that's the Army where I'm going to go in and be the platoon leader and eventually the company commander. How is this possible? Why did this happen? What are we going to do about it? And I said, what you're going to do about it is what officers since day one have done. Lead. And all of the aspects of leadership that you're learning here, that's what you're going to employ. Because that's the world that you're going to see reflected in the United States Army.
Gentlemen, can you reflect, so the rebuilding, structurally and intention, and not only the blending of what you've described, Fred, sociologically, but really bridging and breaching that thing I talked about in terms of classism divides.
Well,
right?
structurally, we did something very important. We used the great American tradition, buy it. And what we did is we paid good kids money to become infantrymen.
That's right.
As opposed to being the bottom of the heap, which people considered those who got shunned into the infantry in those days. We paid bonuses. And we had test scores that were used to establish whether you were eligible for these bonuses. So you talk about a structural solution to a recognized problem. Well, there it goes. Money. Now, why would you be attracted to this $10,000 bonus? Because probably you or your parents had never seen $10,000 before.
Exactly.
And that was one of the things we did.
Yep. I love the mix also structurally, intentionally so, of East meets West. The so-called flyover parts of America, not being flown over, living with the middle of the nation, East meets West, North meets South, right? All echelons of socioeconomic strata being bridged, and we're all living together all of a sudden towards, as part of an institution designed for repetitive, looking forward for rebuilding, towards an asymptotical end. Towards what end, right? And an end that is constantly moving, always trying to approach an answer. But as the older I get, I would hope the wiser I get. And, the beauty of that idea is that we never really reach the end. It's always moving towards, but we never lock into any particular solid static moment, which at any given time, if we lock into one static moment as the way it is, at least 49% of the rest of us are going to be unhappy and probably part of the disenfranchised, right? So thank goodness it's always an arc that is bending, but perhaps never fully reaches, right?
The two lines never fully converge. A couple of things. First of all, let me put in a plug. I was at a book talk last week for a new book published by Oxford Press titled Bend But Do Not Break.
There you go.
And it's about the history of the all-volunteer force.
And we know the author.
The names associated with it are familiar to us. Jason Dempsey.
One of my former students.
Yes, and one of mine. And a
Jaron
lot of the
Wharton.
internal chapters written by folks who are who we taught or who taught with us.
Yes.
That book, interestingly, sold out its first run on the first day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, that should tell us something about how salient these issues are.
Yes.
To the broader public, or at least the policy world, that a book about, first of all, the origins and the foundations of the all-volunteer force, but about the future of the all-volunteer force, is viewed so important. It was, on the day that we met, it was the number one book on for international relations, security studies, military affairs, and military history, I think.
Yeah.
On Amazon sales. And so I commend it to all the listeners, because a lot of these issues we're talking about, what was underlying the creation of the all-volunteer force, the standing up of Volar, today's Army wants to join you, and all the struggles of how that was defined, and then what that Army eventually became. It's an extraordinary story, but if you look at how the military evolved over the course of 250 years, there were moments where we had some sort of an adjustment that had to take place. The great reforms at the turn of the 19th and the 20th century that essentially created the reserve force and restructured the National Guard and had some real defining points for the creation of the regular army. The Joint Act in 1947 that created the Air Force and defined different roles. And then the volunteer force. When I became a platoon leader, I had all Volar enlisted privates and specialists, but almost every single one of the non-commissioned officers I had been a draftee. We're not volunteers, but it had been a draftee, to include several who the judge said, son, you got two choices here. You can go spend 6 months up the river, or the recruiter's sitting right outside waiting to sign you up. and a lot of them had some kind of chilling stories about what it was that got them there. But that kind of adjustment was also part of a national resolution of who we are as a nation, who we were as a nation at the time, where we thought we should go, what kinds of things we thought we needed to correct and adjust, or at least give some serious thought to in the broader social order. One of the things that struck me is every time we go through one of these, you'll get some political leader who will get up and say, well, the defense of our nation is not a social experiment. The military is not a social experiment. I hate to tell you this, but from 1775 on, every single waking day, we have been a social experiment. Yeah. Officers who are not born into landed gentry and don't inherit their commissions. Good God, man.
What are you talking
about?
Exactly.
Yeah. Giving weapons, actual weapons to soldiers and teaching them how to use them and then sending them back out into society. You must be mad. Trying to rebuild a unified national army after a brutal, bloody civil war in which half the officer corps turned and marched in the opposite direction when the country called. Our friends in the history department used to love that, out of the 22 battles won in the American Civil War, 21 were commanded by graduates of West Point.
Yeah.
But the parentheses, the asterisk was, and the leaders who lost on the other side were also West Point graduates.
That's right.
Right. The volunteer army was, and certainly Fred and I'm sure, Ike, you still got some of the tail end of this, especially in a technical branch like aviation.
Yeah,
was traumatic and dramatic. But I grew up around Fort Huachuca, an old cavalry post in the Southwest, which had been home of the Buffalo Soldiers for many years, and was part of the settlement of the frontier. And you go back and read the accounts of the officers who were serving at the time and those enlisted in NCOs who could write. Some of the things are different, like about having to take care of their horses, but there are an awful lot of threads about trying to pull together teams of people who come from all over the country, who speak. Back then, it was not, they speak Spanish, or they come from the inner city. Back then, it was they speak German, or they have these thick Irish accents, or they speak Italian. And how is it that we put them together as a force that is committed to, number one, that civic religion that you talk about, Ike, and number two, more to the point, defending that common civic religion, to include people on both sides who argue about compared to what, according to whom, just exactly how are we going to live and execute this idea.
But look at another structural issue
go ahead,
that was so important in that 70s time frame. We saw a shift in the makeup of the legislative branch, less so in the Senate, but more so in the House. And that shift was reflected in the downward trend in the numbers of members who had military service.
Yep.
Absolutely. When I was on the Hill, 73, 74, almost every single representative and the Senate as well, to include my boss, Morris Udall, had served.
And then what happened?
And that started to chip away. Years later, when I was working on political campaigns before I came in the Army, that was flipping very dramatically. You had a few Vietnam veterans who were out there running for both parties, but that really diminished. And I don't think that really came back until after 9/11. There was a real flood, and you've seen an increase
lately
in those who are serving and those who are running for office, but it was, an empty cabinet there for about 30
And the
years.
other distinction between that group of veterans serving in elected office was officer, non-officer. And we saw the difference, I think, if you go back and look at some of the legislative initiatives, as to how they looked at some of this legislation being pushed to change the structural nature of the Army. And we all know you can buy all the equipment you want, all the weapons, everything you want, but it still comes down to the soldier who's going to operate it, the soldier who's going to fly it, drive it, turn the switch or whatever, or as we used to say in the infantry, carry everything that they can on their back to do what you want them to do. Now, how are you going to take care of them? I remember that day when we got the largest pay raise in the history of the U.S. Army during the Reagan administration. And the response to that was not so much, oh yeah, we're going to get some more pay. The response was he was only able to do that because the people who had to pass the legislation got it. Other presidents had proposed such things, but it didn't happen. And that gets to that divide that we see, the ebb and flow of that divide. Right now, it's real popular to say, let's pay our military more. Really popular. Why is it popular? And I think that's something that gets to your earlier point, Ike, about the world in which we're living today versus earlier days. And it seems to me that one of the reasons is you can offer up those in uniform symbolically. Yeah. And it has feet, it grows, and it makes you very popular to say you support the men and women in uniform. But support is more than just give them more money. Yeah. And you also mentioned something I think just ties into what Jay was just saying, working on the Hill. We did not always know what was being done by whom and for whom because we didn't have the communications network that would tell us. And in your intro, you talked about what exists today. Everybody's a publisher. Everybody's a cameraman. Everybody has their studio. Right,
right here, right?
I have my studio.
Everybody has a podcast. Yeah,
everybody's got a podcast.
This thing is more powerful than the computers that we had when computers first came out. Let me give you a story that kind of tells how we learned to live with this. During the administration of General Palmer as superintendent at West Point, every cadet had a computer. Some brilliant person, I don't know if they were a vice president or not, but they invented something called the internet. And we were a test bed for the internet because it was under DOD. Yeah. And they created these devices called chats, now we would call them, but they were for various groups. So each company had one, each battalion, regiment, and there was one for the Corps cadets. And all of a sudden, it became like what I remembered in high school called the slam book. You've heard that term before? Slam book was nothing but a way of expressing yourself about somebody or something, either anonymously or with your name in it, but it expressed an opinion, and you would pass the book around and other people would make comments and the book would come back to you and you could see what they said. What does that sound like today? An internet group, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden, the dean of the academic board had to put out a memorandum to the commandant about things that were being said in this internet, this newfangled thing called the internet. And it was about instructors. It was about other cadets. And then the comm found out that his element of West Point was no different. They were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we had to suppress free speech.
Mm-hmm.
And that suppression lasted for another several decades. My incoming instructor cohort was the one that came in when they were issued the computers for the first time. And I remember our friend John Stoner, who was executive officer later on at the time, and I sitting in my office reading these chats because someone had told us, hey, you can drop in on the company C2 chat, and just blowing our minds thinking they have no filters. And it's what the internet eventually became. They were saying things and responding to things that face to face they would never do, that were not just violations of good order and discipline.
Yeah.
And Article 134 of the UCMJ, they were violations of everything your grandmother taught you about how to be a good person.
And Jay, there were partition in it. That was the problem.
That was part of the problem. The other problem that we discovered was we sat there watching it, and then all of a sudden John looked up and said, oh my God, do you know we've been doing this for 2.5 hours? And later, when I came back in 94, there was strong pressure to plug the core back into the World Wide Web, which is what the internet had eventually become. And there was very strong resistance to it. It took several years to convince the then superintendent to allow us to plug in because of the concerns about not just those kinds of intemperate exchanges, but what kinds of things came with the internet, and it wasn't all uplifting literature. But on the other hand, if you wanted to be an education institution and keep up with your peer institutions and serve your student population well, to be able to do the research and all those other things, you could not survive with it without it. So, in many ways, we were a test bed for that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it really fully hit us till many years later how much of what that became we really kind of saw in its infancy. I don't think I speaking for myself, I don't think I foresaw it becoming what it did as kind of the global force it is.
And
now,
you go national,
where everybody has their own algorithm, and you can, yes, you have access to phenomenal amounts of information and phenomenal outlets, but there is still selective searching. The algorithm is going to feed you stuff that reinforces what it is you already believe, it's an information revolution, but everybody's got their own revolution. Everybody's got their own banners.
How does this change what we just had a conversation on, the goodness of all volunteer force? Because we have these mechanisms that are voluntarism. We're all volunteering into these separate algorithmic silos that are not necessarily moving us in a direction of what Fred talked about early on, of a collective rebuilding towards I'll call it a civic engaging end, but putting us on pathways of divergence by voluntary selection algorithmically. How does this bring us to the contemporary moment? Yeah.
I recall, having officers come in from grad school, getting ready to start teaching, sitting down with them, kind of assessing what they'd experienced and what their grad school experience was like, and having a couple of them say, I took this class from this guy named Putnam, and he's going to write this book about bowling alone, about the end of volunteerism and communities in America. What I think is actually happening is it's not a complete breakdown in isolation, but it's a restructuring, and it's very tribal. This is, not to go completely cosmic here, but anytime there has been a major change in an industrial or technological capacity, anything that is, as Marshall McLuhan said, an extension of the human capabilities and human senses,
Mm-hmm.
it has had enormously disruptive effects. The most famous being, of course, Gutenberg inventing movable type. Hey, good news, we can sell more Bibles and print them faster. Bad news, we're about to go into 500 years of bloody religious revolution, a complete restructuring of the political and economic
Because you can read the
order.
Bible
Yeah.
for yourself.
You can
Right,
read the Bible for
exactly.
yourself and say, wait
Right.
a minute, that's not what I thought you told me it said.
Yeah.
But a breakdown of the guilds, all those kinds of things. That's what we're going through now, and
Yeah.
I would argue that the difficulty, the hard thing about chasing after this cat and grabbing onto its tail is is that we're still waiting to see how these different tribes fall out. And that's really what's happening. And they're coalescing around the same information and the same experience. And the problem for that is not just convincing people of the importance to serve and some sort of a civic commitment. It's those who do come in to serve. What are their expectations of what the Army or the Navy or the Air Force is? What
Yeah.
is it that they think they're going to do? What is it that they believe they're going to defend, and who they take orders from, and what orders they do and do not have to follow, and what is the reality of what the military, number one, has to confront every single day when the spectrum of conflict has not pushed us into full-on war,
Mm-hmm.
but doing your duty is every bit as important, if not more so, than at preventing war or preparing for the sad reality of war. What is it that they expect they're going to do and that they're going to be asked to do? What is it that the culture of the current world has kind of prepared them for? And the current the recent declaration that the Army and Harvard are going to see other people.
Yeah.
The consequence for that, I would argue Harvard's going to be, oh well, I'm sure we'll find, the money that is going to cost us and the change in our sofa cushions, and it's a real shame. But the real cost to that is what is lost when we're not getting diverse voices from Harvard and Cornell and Syracuse and Columbia and all those other universities, and that they're applying litmus test to education, and as is happening now in the professional military education world that we were all a part of, when the syllabus is becoming narrower and narrower and narrower and has to be pre-approved, and the definition of anything that the three of us thought resembled teaching critical thinking has been flipped on its head. What does
Yeah.
that mean in terms of the people that we get, both as serving sailors and Air Force members and Space Force defenders and soldiers? And what does it mean in terms of the officer corps that leads them? And what does it mean in terms of the senior officers who advise those civil leaders who in our system have the absolute, and in my view, rightfully so, ultimate decision about the choices to be made, and yet, as Fred has pointed out, have very little experience in the military themselves. And if they do, it's down at the micro tactical level for a few
Yeah.
years, which
Yeah.
doesn't translate into making comprehensive, viable
Yeah.
strategy.
Can one of you, just for our listeners, quickly give context to what you're talking about, Jay, in terms of the latest from the Pentagon and the decision with Harvard University, the curtailment of advanced civil schooling programs?
Well, the secretary announced that we will no longer send officers to Harvard for graduate school.
Right.
That in his statement that Harvard is a woke institution.
Right.
And this is part of a larger view that what colleges and universities do is indoctrinate students as opposed to exposing them to a wide range of difficult and contentious ideas, whether they are from the left or the right.
Yeah.
And teach people how to think through the way they confront them. And that's a dramatic change from the experience that we had for the benefit of our listeners. When the three of us were on the senior faculty every year, we would sit down with a stack of files, and Fred, you were the personnel officer for a while, as I recall. And you could have as many as 200 files of people who want to come and teach in the Department of Social Sciences, and we picked 12, maybe in a good year, 15,
right,
who get to go to top-end grad schools, come and teach, and then most importantly, when they're done teaching, take that education, take that experience, and go back out and serve in senior leadership positions with a broader sense of not only certain strategic principles and principles of American politics and economics and international politics, but a broader sense of what the civilian population is educated about, and how those people who were their classmates at Harvard and Syracuse and Cornell and Columbia, and then 20 years later, they're going to be saying, "Yes, Madam Secretary. Yes, yes, Mr. Chairman," that they serve with, and the relationship with certain schools has always been testy. Particularly when you had that period of time when ROTC was kicked off campus.
And we couldn't send anybody to Harvard or other schools that had dropped ROTC.
Right. Although, as our friend Dan Kaufman reminded me in an email yesterday, when the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee made that declaration, it was shortly before he and Jack Reed and a host of other social guys were told, go to Harvard, but keep your head down, maybe grow your hair, and don't wear your uniform on the yard, but keep going to Harvard. And if anybody catches you, we'll take the heat.
Yeah.
But the irony is there has been a rebuilding of a lot of that bridge that was lost during the Vietnam era.
Yes.
You now have officers who get ROTC commissions and who are Harvard graduates.
Yes.
And Yale graduates and Cornell Cornell, I don't think ever gave up its ROTC.
They did not, proudly
and
so.
Nor did Princeton.
That's right.
But Columbia, in fact, Jason Dempsey, who you mentioned earlier, was a big part of this, had rebuilt their relationship with ROTC.
Mm-hmm.
So, ironically, that civil-military link is as robust as it's ever been. And we're talking about fracturing that because the other part of his announcement was, this is what's happening to Harvard, and we're going to review our relationship with every other college.
Yeah, but let me put a point on what you're saying there, Jay. Harvard is just the opening volley.
Correct.
Salvo.
There will be more.
Absolutely.
But
there will
when
be.
Each of us sat at that table during our time structuring the class of faculty for 2 years out, or in some cases only 1 year out, we looked at what the person said they were interested in, and we said Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Colgate, Syracuse, University of Arizona, Michigan, UNC, Florida. Yep. Why did we do that? Well, there were two answers to that question. One was because the Army had this financial constraint, and officers in many states, like North Carolina, could come here and the Army would only have to pay in-state tuition, even though the officer wasn't from the state. And that was part of that agreement because they wanted us. So let's bring them here. But we also wanted a faculty that came back 2 years afterwards and had different experiences at different institutions.
Absolutely. In fact, Fred, what I used to say is, that if in a lesson conference, in a discussion over how a certain lesson should be taught, one of the faculty members did not lunge across the conference table, ready to strangle one of their compadres, yelling, "Die, heretic!" If that did not happen, I had failed in my job.
Exactly.
And keeping that kind of diverse range to include, because I was a beneficiary of this, as were you, Fred, the idea that the faculty was not going to be all West Point graduates, let alone all West Point graduates who just went to Harvard.
Right.
There were going to be some University of Arizona and Howard University. And we had more than a few individuals who turned out to be extraordinary faculty members and went on to be extraordinary senior leaders.
Yes.
Who had, I'm thinking one individual, the late Mike Hummel, who Ike knows, who joined the Army because the mine shut down and he didn't have a job anymore.
God, love that
and then
guy.
Over the years, he cobbled together 6 credits here and another dozen credits here and a couple of CLEP tests there. And number one, when we looked at his file, I remember my reaction, looking, as we always did, at how they had done as a leader, what kind of an officer they were, before we looked at their academic credentials. And I remember looking at his file saying, I don't want to hire this guy. I want to be this guy.
Right.
And the other part of it was when we would send their files off to Columbia and to Fletcher and to Duke and to Chapel Hill and to Syracuse and Stanford, there would always be somebody on the faculty who'd be, well, I don't know, their GRE wasn't quite high enough. But there were always people on the faculty there who would say, the late Dick Schultz, God rest his soul, at Fletcher, somebody used to always raise this issue every year in the graduate admissions meetings. And he would say, you admit this person, number one, it's no skin off of us because the Army's paying for him and it frees up a TA award that we can give to somebody else. But I guarantee you, no matter what you think their academic record is now, end of first semester, they're going to be at the top of their cohort.
Yeah.
And Dick said he never had to pay up on that bet. And so we were partnered in that effort by those colleges and universities. And Fred, when they went through one of those kind of periodic things of, we got to get more low-cost schools, and what about the University of whatever? My phone started ringing off the hook, and I'm hearing from people at Columbia and Princeton and Harvard saying, okay, how low do we need to get the tuition to come in under the cap?
Right.
And so we were actually sending people to those top tier schools for what it would have cost to send them to Chapel Hill or University of Arizona or
in-state rates,
University of Colorado, because they understood the value of that, not just to what they were giving back to the institution of the military in having a well-educated, critical thinking officer.
What made all of this possible was that we were working for a leader with great vision and insight.
Yep. Well, yes.
And
of
course, he was a double Harvard grad, and his successor.
And his successor.
But what made this possible was he was able to make things work and wasn't bound by the strict interpretation of somebody's memo. But we were able to make things work.
Well, you didn't have the SecDef seeing it as necessary to micromanage down to that level. The SecDef had bigger things to
and
worry
of course,
about.
And dare I say, it wasn't ideological.
Exactly.
It was bringing a small C, emphasis on small C, conservative organization called the military, all about order and stability, into bringing that type of organization into a small L liberal academic institution.
Absolutely.
And putting them into a marketplace of contestation and competing ideas for nation, not self.
Exactly. Right. Because that's what we knew.
Point of structure. It's structure, right?
And we knew that when they became senior leaders and were working in the five-sided puzzle palace, and having to hammer out national strategy and react to real crises, that kind of an intellectual crucible was what they were going to have to operate in. They were going to be dealing with people from Department of State and from the White House, and even like Department of Treasury, and certainly people on the Hill who had a wide range of perspectives, and explaining the military point of view on that, and also then taking these national imperatives and the definitions of national interest and national strategy, and taking them back to the force and explaining them to the members of the military who are going to be the ones to implement and execute.
Yeah, I remember once we had one of my jobs. Jay, you may remember when the department had the Distinguished Lecture Series.
I am still answering nasty letters from, why did you let that communist Pete Seeger come and speak at West Point and poison the minds of our cadets?
Exactly. Well, Pete and his little boat, and we both had kids in elementary school at West Point who got to spend time on there doing that environmental program, and somebody thought that was just terrible. But anyway, we had a distinguished speaker, happened to be a Harvard professor in his earlier day and later day, and he came to West Point, and after the speech, we let the press do an interview, and a lady from one of the local papers says, "Well, Dr. Kissinger, how much is West Point paying you to come here and speak?" And fortunately, I had briefed Dr. Kissinger before the lecture that there was a news article talking about West Point spending this kind of money for programs. And of course, they had no idea what they were talking about because it was all donated funds, and he didn't even accept an honorarium. But he says, "Madam, I come here to speak at no cost because I'm talking to the people that are going to be the ones leading our nation's military at the time that will require brilliance and vision." I can't say that about every school I go to.
Nope.
And she printed that.
Well, as a related note, for well over a decade, almost a decade and a half, when I was teaching in a department chair at National Defense University in the College of International Security Affairs, our student body was roughly 80%, sometimes more, international students, largely from Global South, but from a wide range of places. And these were very, very accomplished officers and senior diplomats who then went on to, I have former students who I advised on their thesis who went on to be the vice chairman of their JCS or their permanent rep to the UN. And very early on in the curriculum, we would have a class and we would talk about, of course, that fundamental issue: what is power? How do you define national power? Now, the Americans in the class, American military and from some of the agencies, would start talking about military power and military capability.
Right.
These individuals would talk about not just military capability or resources, but what's the education level of your population, and what are the opportunities for education? Because if you're going to carry out a national security strategy, especially in this changing world, you better have people who are smart enough to be able to do it. What's the state of your health care? What's the state of early childhood social support for young families? All those kinds of things that provide you with national strength and power, but that take 18, 20, 25 years to build, and that do not necessarily rest with solely going out and buying guns and bullets.
Right.
It was eye-opening for the American students. It was certainly a reassuring ego boost for those of us on the faculty. But it was a real insight into why this is important and how the rest of the world in which we live and have to interact, understands capabilities, understands and interprets what it is we may be happening to do at the moment.
And that gets us to
If
that
we
fragmentation thing.
Absolutely.
Now I want to be gracious with your time. You all have been incredibly gracious with your time. I want to maybe give us three more questions, and the third one's going to be a lightning round of just quick shot questions.
I thought we were just getting started. I mean,
well, I'm happy to go further. We'll leave it to Jose.
I have another commitment coming up,
but
listen, I got you blocked.
Yeah, let me I mean, such a rich conversation. I knew it would be, and I counted on, and it's come true that no plan survives first contact, especially with the oracles that I have in front of me here. Okay, we tell a story, right? It's a story about rebuilding, about structured intentionality. We talk about a story going back to our own fathers, our own parents, and taking us up to contemporary time. We're covering a lot of American political development, time and space and context there. In that conversation, we have landed on an understanding and appreciation. We kind of come naturally and organically to the role of the military, certainly to fight and win America's wars, of course. But where those to what ends of when we use force for power purposes for the nation, and when we declare those things, as Fred talked about early, towards what end, the use of force for power purposes, that it always needs to, particularly for a small l, small d, small r, liberal democratic republic, to begin and end, we the people, with a civic core, a civic intentionality, right? The to what ends of any instrumentation of force, in any coming together of different elements of the national polity, to form together towards that end for nation, not self. But at the root of it is that tradition of liberal democratic republicanism, all small case letters, non-ideological, right? It almost sounds Pollyannish, but we've lived this. We know that this is what this has been about. And the fact that as an institution, the military has served this role of social experimentation, a micro lab, if you will, of the nation. I'm still trying to figure out, in my youth, right? I'm still trying to figure out whether that institution of social experimentation, that laboratory, is a leading indicator or a lagging indicator. And probably the answer is yes, and it's both. It's both, right? I'm getting the right reverb from you all that tells me I've been a good student of you both. It's not coincidental to me that because of all that reality that we've just laid out, that one of, if not the first targets, I'm using that word intentionally, of the second Trump administration, the shock and awe first few months, was against academia writ large, civilian academia, and more pointedly within the military, beyond the senior leader purge of certain leaders seen ideological not fit, right? Going into the PME institutions, service academies, and our war colleges and our intermediate level education institutions, our schools and colleges and university schoolhouses, within that enterprise we call the Joint Professional Military Education System, and doing exactly what, Jay, I think you had talked briefly about, curtailing, Eye of Sarin, if you will, reaching in and looking at and taking a red pen and saying, well, this of your curriculum and syllabus, this is questionable, so let's scratch that out. Going into faculty bios at our service academies and institutions and saying, well, you're a gender and race and class expert by academic pedigree, but we're not going to put that on your public facing bio. Curtailing, changing, pressure to change titles of research programs and agendas, right? Because those titles were too, quote unquote, woke, right? Too much about DEI, et cetera, et cetera. Going in the libraries and basically doing the digital equivalent of book burning, pulling off select pieces of works and walking past others, when Toni Morrison and Angela Mailu can be pulled off the library shelves, even in our PME institutions and we can walk past Mein Kampf, Houston, we have a problem. Not coincidental to me that those are the first deliberate targets, because all the things we've just talked about here in terms of the imperative role, the cornerstone bedrock role, not only that our military institutions serve for the republic. We were a nation in arms. We had an army first before we had a nation. Right? That's why the armies and the Navy celebrated our 250th anniversary last year. And that was vital and critical for us to have a birthday to celebrate this coming summer.
But
right?
there's a simple answer to what
in the story you all have told is that same story.
But there's a simple answer to what you're saying.
Please.
And the answer was, if you have 4 years to prepare an agenda, and you have a think tank that puts together an action plan with several hundred agenda-fulfilling points.
Yes.
Then day one...
We're talking about Project 2025.
Day one, you come up with your stack of executive orders that you've already had prepared.
Yes.
And you've decided, based on the input you were given, that you don't want to waste the time trying to do this stuff legislatively because they're always slow. Plus, they ask questions and want to go into the weeds on the details. Mm-hmm. You rule by executive order. And so my executive order is, we're not going to teach this anymore. We're not going to teach that anymore. And I chuckled at first because I said, my gosh, do they realize how short-sighted this is? I remember Jay Parker getting me into a long, engaged meeting because he proposed to teach a course on politics and motion pictures. You remember that? I know Jay remembers.
I remember it. I ended up teaching it. That is actually on my CV more than teaching Introduction to American Politics or International Relations.
And you know what the issue was? How can we be a serious institution if we're teaching courses like that are a waste of the government's money and the time of the cadets, that they would learn something about how these parts of our culture intersect? Mm-hmm. And you have cadets I know who took that course and are out there in the world today who benefit from their understanding of intersection and parallelism.
We have professors at Columbia University and Harvard University and everywhere in between, and Stanford University and everywhere in between, building their own models off the exemplary model that Jay built, off the house that Jay built in this respect, right? I mean, this is real. This is real. I remember going to Colonel Parker, and me and a colleague, I won't mention her name, but we all know who she is. I won't mention her name, and we going to Jay with this novel idea of developing a course called The Politics of Race, Gender, and Sexuality.
I remember.
Which was on the target list right out the gates during the first Trump administration and since. And we've lost a lot of officers who had an affiliation with those courses.
That's right? With those, that individual, by the way, is now a tenured faculty member at one of the leading law schools in the country.
Of course she is. Yeah. Of course she is. Brilliant.
We prepared cadets for service. And I was there during the great 3 debates over the mission statement, which you'll never get a unanimous vote because everybody has their own opinions, right? And that's okay.
Right.
But why are we here and what are we doing? We understood our mission. And we were not accomplishing our mission if we sent leaders out of there who didn't understand that world where they were going to lead soldiers and didn't understand that, well, we were kind of modest about it. Everything's about politics. Mm-hmm. We kind of said that as a under the breath comment. Yeah, you can go take that course over in thermodynamics or whatever, but the world is about politics. Thermal might help you at some point.
Right. Exactly.
But we were on a mission to ensure that we were preparing cadets. Now, fast forward, when I was at National War College, which is an amazing experience, as both of you know, I had a seminar where, there were usually 16 people in the seminar, and just like the overall course, 4 Army, 4 Navy/Marines, 4 Air Force, 4 civilians.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it worked out, but I had 3 guys sitting in that seminar who later in their military careers were chiefs of service. Army, Navy,
Amazing.
Air Force. They were lieutenant colonel / commander at the time. And of course, they were highly regarded by their service, or they wouldn't have been sitting there in the first place.
Right.
Now, fast forward 10 years after they graduated, we had a reunion, and they all came. And they all made comments that were unscripted, but the bottom was, I had the opportunity at a critical point in my career to understand things that no one else had ever taught me in all of my professional military education.
Yeah.
Not what to think, but how to think and how to understand the world in which I was supposed to lead.
Yes.
Now, we did that in the same way at the level of cadets.
That's right.
And when we look at our cadets who've gone on as successful young men and women, whether in the military or in civilian life, there's a constant thread that I see when I talk to them, that the foundation got them off on the right start.
That's right.
Now,
That's right.
undo the foundations, and what will we have?
Yeah.
I understand that the fragmentation that exists in this country right now, what should be taught, what shouldn't be taught, where should it be taught, where should people get their education? I understand all of that, but it doesn't change the real bottom line. Without the right people properly prepared, you're not going to send out the right people properly prepared.
Oh, well said. Well said, Fred.
Absolutely.
Let me leave you guys with quick lightning round set of questions. And then a lot of these questions I curate from commentary and ideas coming from the listeners, the traveler community. So it's a nice way of reconnecting to the point and purpose of this whole Civic Brief thing, right? To the people. So I'm going to give each of these in one word is best. If you can answer in one word or a couple of words, maybe no more.
I've never had a problem with one word.
First. You all know both. This is the hardest question for me ever. You all know me for a long time, right? Curse with the gift of gab, right? Okay. One word describing America's civic mood right now.
Fractured.
From each of you. Fractured. Jay?
Fearful.
Oh, fearful and fractured. Yeah. Most misunderstood civic responsibility.
Education.
Yeah.
Service.
Love it. Most overtrusted institution.
Wow.
You want me to answer that one and relieve you guys of that one?
I would like to hear your answer. Maybe that will help me sort through mine, because I'm not sure every institution always needs to be fully trusted. After all, we structured our government under the assumption that you can't fully trust every institution.
There you go.
That was kind of the bottom line.
Like the old line about why the sun never sets on the British Empire. You can't trust them in the dark. Remember?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the if there's a fear right now, it's that we're over trusting the executive. But
that was my answer.
But that doesn't mean that's the permanent case.
Yeah.
How about church?
Yeah. No. I could
religion, yeah.
Yep. I could fake it as if I intended for that to be a trick question.
It
right?
was.
Come off looking really, really smart. I won't do that.
Take the win, Ike. Take
I'm going to be very honest with you all and say the reason why we're struggling with this question is because it's a bad question. It's a poorly worded question. You all gave the right constitutional answer. Shared power through separate institutions.
Well,
right?
I'm married to a former law P who used to teach con law.
Yes.
So I better get this right.
There you go.
Well,
okay, you can stay at home.
The point you make, Jay, showed how much we were committed to getting it right, because we used to have that conference between the historians, the law faculty, and us, all who had a piece of teaching the Constitution in our own way.
Oh, wow.
In our own tradition, and how we were going to make sure that we were on the same page. And I think it was important, particularly in the mid-'80s, when we were doing curriculum revision and cadets were going to get less of something or more of something, depending on what they did. But we wanted to make sure that when you stood out there in Mikey Stadium and raised your right hand and said, I'm going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic, you knew what you were talking about.
That's right. Amen. Amen.
I'm going to ask you all 3 more questions real quick. One civic virtue we need most.
Integrity.
Okay.
I will echo that.
Yeah, and I'm going to join you in chorus here on that one. One book or text every citizen should read or reread. This is a fun one.
Well, I'm obviously biased about this.
Yes, sir.
The Constitution of the United States, absolutely. And I'm surprised at how many people don't realize that you can sit down and read that in about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Because
you don't have to. You don't have to ask your congressional staffer to tell you what it's about.
Yeah. Exactly.
Gutenberg.
Exactly.
Gutenberg.
I mean, amen. It's normally I would go on a great length about how it's important to read all of Thucydides in multiple translations and Marcus Aurelius.
And if you have more time, you can
actually read Constitution.
You can read the long version.
Read Clausewitz, but read the Constitution
and other essential documents of American democracy, which you know what they include, right?
Well,
Indeed.
I would
hopefully
say
if you read that will lead you into reading the Federalist Papers.
That's on my list. Yep.
At least read the baseline document.
Well,
I'm so glad you said Thucydides.
Is Franklin Roosevelt 1941 The Four Freedoms?
Thank you.
Because that was fundamental for getting us through the war.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how many Americans still remember those 4 freedoms and why they're important, and how they've been fragmented, and a lot of other things that have changed in our life. Like, I would have never, ever in a previous life ever thought that what happened at halftime in a Super Bowl was so fundamental to understanding America 2026.
Yes.
I would have never gone there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me leave you all with this one. This is a good one to end on. What gives you the most hope?
I still teach. There has not been a year since I turned the age of 5 that I was not either a teacher or a student or both.
I love it.
And I'm going to walk into a classroom tomorrow night, and no matter how glum, how despondent, how worried and fearful I am, after 55 minutes in a classroom with students, particularly students who have stepped up and said, I'm getting this education because I want to have a career that has something to do with national service. Whenever I walk out of that classroom, I walk out with hope.
Yes. Well, I was going to say, I guess it's the same, different way. But what gives me hope is the resiliency of the American people.
There you go.
And no matter how much we may not believe that they're bright as they are, I think there's always a tipping point where they come back and say, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to put up with that. I'm not going to stand for that. And that's what elections are supposed to be about. But even outside of the electoral system, we govern by public opinion nowadays. We govern by X and tweets and social whatever it's called and all these other things. We always have our finger up which way's the wind blowing. But I think the people can send a message that has powerful impact. And we see examples of that, not as many as I'd like to see, but that's what gives me hope.
Given the role that we've talked about that our military has played over the course of American political development and where the military and our JPME institutions are today, what do you all in this context, and we'll end on this, I promise, what role for JPME and the services writ large, not role, what duty today for tomorrow?
For me, that duty is to preserve and protect the fundamentals that have gotten us to 251 years as an army, and lesser for others, but what got us here? Yeah. We've been in hurricanes and typhoons before, and we came out of them. We might have been a little bruised and battered, but we still came out of them, and we have to stay the course. We cannot give sway to those forces that would like to see us be less than we should be.
Oh, well said. Okay.
I will kind of echo that, but boil it down to the first general order. We must guard our post
in a military manner,
and the limits of our post until properly relieved.
I'll walk my post in a military manner, saluting all officers in all colors, not cased.
Not cased.
We're not casing any colors.
No, sir.
My goodness. Thank you so much for that. And on behalf of our whole listenership and watchership, the fellow travelers, I want to thank you for your service, past, present, and future, and continuing, right? Thank you for today. Folks, this is opening up the February experience of the Civic Brief, and thanks for being with us. I'll see you next time with my solo spot. Thanks again, gentlemen, for everything you've done and everything you continue to do. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And go Soch.
Thank you.
Go Soch.
And I have to ask you one critical question, ask both of you, because it bears on everything we've been talking about. Did you hear about the guy that fell into the well?
Oh, no. I thought we would get through this without one of Fred Black's dad jokes, but I should have known better. No.
Well,
Fred,
well,
he said,
I hate to tell you, but he didn't see that well.
Oh, there it is, Jay. That's going to be the haunt for the rest of the day for us.
Think about
Wonderful.
It is.
Thank you, Fred.
Think about it.
No, I love it.
I swear about once a week, there will be something Fred will do online, and I'll show it to Corrine, and she'll go, where does he get this from?
I love it. I love it.
And tell Corrine we said hello, please.
Absolutely.
And same to Sylvia and Lauren.
Yeah, and same to Sylvia. Lauren says hello to all of you. And thanks
and we
so
got to
much.
get together sometime and not just on a screen.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.